Welcome to Class 17 of 32 classes in the course Introduction to the Bible. This is where we left off last hour in Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So we're looking at the Mosaic Law, and before God gives Moses and the nation of Israel the 10 Commandments, he reminds them that he is the one who brought them out of the land of Egypt. And this idea of remembering God's deliverance out of Egypt is something that is repeated many times throughout the remainder of the Old Testament, as a reminder and a call to the nation of Israel to look to their past, and to look to God's gracious provision in delivering them out of Egypt and into the Promised Land in fulfillment of his promises to Abraham. And remember, we will see that Israel fails miserably at multiple points, and yet God delivers them out of Egypt, even knowing that they are going to fail, because he is a faithful God. The first two commandments of the 10 Commandments are, you shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make for yourself a carved image. And what we find throughout Israel's history in the Old Testament is that these were the two primary sins from which all other sins of the nation flowed. These are ultimately the sins for which God sent in the Assyrians in 722 and the Babylonians in 606 to the southern kingdom to bring judgment upon the nation of Israel, because they had abandoned the Lord their God. They had frequently gone after other gods, which we know are actually demons, that idols simply represent demons. And so when you worship idols, when you worship false gods, you are worshiping demons. And the prince of the demons, the prince of the power of the air, the god of this world is none other than Satan, the highest of the demons. So we know that all other religions, apart from the religion that God has given, apart from the worship of the one true God, is therefore, by nature, it is demonic, it is satanic. Now, another thing that we need to remember concerning the 10 Commandments, even though God has given them in such a way that they will be inscribed on tablets of stone, and even though these lay the foundation for the remainder of the commandments that are given to the nation of Israel, over 600 of them, this doesn't mean that these things just at this point in Exodus chapter 20 that they become wrong. So, for example, before Exodus chapter 20, it was still wrong it had always been wrong to worship anything except the Creator God, the God of the universe. It was wrong to worship any god but Yahweh, even before they knew that that was his name. It was not okay to make idols. It was not okay to take the name of the Lord in vain. It was not okay. It was still a sin for children to disobey parents. It was always a sin for people to be unfaithful in marriage. It was always a sin to lie, cheat, steal, commit adultery, commit murder. These things were sins even before the Ten Commandments were given. And even though Jesus fulfilled the Ten Commandments, and on the cross he said, "It is finished," that he had met all of the righteous requirements of the law. And as Christians, we are not bound by the law. Neither were Gentiles bound by the law. But it was still not okay for Gentiles who were not under the law, and it's not okay for Christians who are not under the law to worship other gods, to make idols, to take the Lord's name in vain, to lie, cheat, steal, commit adultery, or commit murder. So the Ten Commandments are based upon the nature and the character of God. And and the moral principles here transcend the dispensations. They are always wrong to do. They are always sin. In verse 5, he says, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments." So this is a conditional covenant. And there are consequences that are visited upon families. And children learn from their parents what is right and wrong. And so the sins of the fathers will be passed on to the children, and God will judge those as well. But at the same time, those parents who raise up their children in the way that they should go, they provide a foundation for life and provide an opportunity for the Lord to bless those children. Now let's think about the significance of the Mosaic covenant for Israel nationally. There are several things to consider. First, it officially unites the God of the universe with his chosen people. It functions almost as a marriage contract, and in fact, marriage imagery is used not only in relation to the Son and the church, it's also used in the Old Testament as reflecting the nature of the relationship between God and his chosen people. And so the law provides the basis for a redeemed people to relate to their God and to maintain fellowship with him through the offerings and the way that worship is prescribed under the law. It provides a basis for justly governing the people of God. The things that are allowed and not allowed, the things that are right and wrong, the things that the people of God should do and should not do, is laid out very clearly, and so it provides a basis for a civil government within the nation of Israel. This is to be a theocracy ruled by God, with his people obeying him and relating properly to one another. And if you think ahead to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is there preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Not the gospel of salvation, but the gospel of the kingdom. The good news of what life will be like under the kingdom that he is going to bring upon the earth. Over the years, the religious leaders had perverted and distorted and obscured and hidden even the truth about God, and they tried to make it seem like if you just obeyed the letter of the law and didn't pay attention to the spirit of the law behind that, the heart of the law, that you would be living a life that is pleasing to God. But Jesus said that I say, you have heard it said, but I say unto you, and then he lists a number of significant things. For example, if you're angry with your brother without a cause, that is like murder. If you look at a woman to lust after her, that is like adultery. And so all of these things are the way life will be like under Jesus Christ when he is ruling and reigning on the earth. In a similar way, going back to the law of Moses, it was to provide a way to rightly govern the people of God on the earth. Another aspect of the law is that it demands strict separation from the pagan nations. Maybe you've heard of the terminology worldview. A worldview is a sum total of all the things that we think, that we believe, and we live our lives and operate and make our decisions, whatever they might be, out of our worldview. And you can't really separate the religious from the secular. All of our lives are shaped by our worldview, including what we believe about God, what we believe about truth, what we believe about morality and ethics, and how we should treat one another. All of those things are combined together to make our worldview. The pagan nations had a worldview that was different than the kind of worldview that God wanted for his people. They were worshiping demons. They were involved in immoral practices in relation to the worship of demons, these false gods. The worship sometimes even included included sacrifice of children. It involved sexual immorality, any number of things, and the way they treated one another, and the way they related to one another and related to their kings, and thinking about these kings as gods. And they had all of these pagan practices, and they were all intertwined. Their civil life, their secular life, their home life, their religious life, they're all wrapped up together. And so the Mosaic Law sort of provides a set of boundaries so that the nation of Israel, the way that they thought, the way that they lived, the way that they acted, the way they interacted with one another, the way they related to God, would be distinctly different from that of the pagan nations. Then for Israelites personally, the law provided a basis for understanding God's holiness and how to deal with sin. That God takes sin seriously, and that he wants his people to live holy lives. It provides a basis for understanding the need for a permanent solution to man's sin problem. Millions, literally millions of animals were sacrificed over the years because of the sins of the nation. Millions of innocent animals died because of the sin of humans. And so sacrifices needed to be offered over and over and over again, and there were all kinds of different sacrifices that were involved. And so these provided a basis for understanding there needs to be another way. There needs to be a final solution. These temporary solutions just do not work. They do not ease the conscience. I still know that I'm a sinner, and they show the need for a different way, a better way, a final, ultimate solution. And all of these were pointing to the Lord Jesus Christ. The law provided a means for expressing faith and fellowship with God. Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey me. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. So we can't see God, and so the prescriptions in the law provided a way for a believer to demonstrate to the Lord that he loved him, that he was thankful for him, that he saw that God's ways were good, better than man's ways. And they expressed man's desire to have fellowship with their Redeemer. And related to something I said earlier, they give principles and laws for appropriately relating to others. How to deal with situations within the family, how to deal with situations in society, between neighbors. What do you do if a neighbor treats you wrongly? What should your neighbor do if you treat him wrongly or you do something that you shouldn't do? And even provision for things that happen accidentally. If you would somehow hurt a member of his family or one of his livestock or a servant, there are provisions for this in the Mosaic Law, a very detailed explanation. And then there was significance for the Gentile nations as well. Even though the law was not given to Gentile nations, Gentiles were not obligated to keep the law of Moses. The law of Moses did provide a means for non-Jews, for Gentiles, to experience fellowship with God by joining to the nation of Israel. I mentioned earlier that Jews were not to take foreign wives because if those foreign wives continued their worship of their false gods, then that would come into the nation of Israel. But you, as a Hebrew man, you could marry a foreigner, a foreign woman, if she would abandon her foreign gods and be willing to worship and serve the God of Israel. So it provided a means by which if foreign nations would come to Israel and submit to the worship of their God and submit to the laws that he had established, that person could join to the nation of Israel and experience a life of blessing. We see this especially in the lives of two women, Rahab, who was a Canaanite, and Ruth, who was a Moabite. And we see that both of these women abandoned their foreign gods and joined to the nation of Israel by placing their faith and trust in the God of Israel. And those two women actually were incorporated not only into the nation of Israel, but they became a part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. In Matthew, both of these women are listed as being ancestors of the Lord Jesus Christ. And then we think about significance of the Mosaic Law over a period of centuries. The Apostle Paul refers to this when in Galatians, he mentions this. Scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith after which would afterward be revealed. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. So the law was like someone taking the nation of Israel as a child and leading them by the hand toward Christ, showing them that there must be a better way. There must be a better way. This can't be the only way. I cannot live up to the standards that God has set. By my own power, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, I fall into sin over and over again. I have to bring sacrifices over and over again. There must be a better way. And so the law served that function as well. Now, as we continue and think about God's promises and provision for ultimate victory in this conflict of the ages, as God moves his plan forward to establish his kingdom of righteousness. Another part of this that was part of the Mosaic law is the tabernacle and its furnishings. And this is what we read in Exodus chapter 40. On the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. So they are already into the first year. So if you remember, when they were in Egypt, they were to take a lamb on the 10th day of the first month. So God moved the calendar to the spring, and they took a lamb on the 10th day of the first month, and it was sacrificed and then eaten with the blood sprinkled on the doorposts on the evening of the 14th day. So this means that in the second year, after leaving Egypt, during their time between Egypt and the Promised Land, and ultimately this would be, it should not have taken them a year. It should only taken them a few weeks at the most to reach the Promised Land. But we'll get to that issue in a little while. So on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. So the first opportunity for this would have been the first anniversary, the beginning of the second year after they had left Egypt. And you shall put in it the ark of the testimony, and partition off the ark with the veil. So they were to create a place of worship for the Lord, a place where they would come, where they would gather. They were to set up their tents around this tabernacle when God would come to dwell among his people. They were to, and God gave very specific instructions, and this was to be a copy, at least a shadow type of the tabernacle in heaven, not made with human hands. So God was very specific and gave very detailed instructions about how this tent was to be made. He also gave instructions for a number of things to be made, to be placed inside the tabernacle. And one would be what is the Ark of the Covenant, Ark of the Testimony, or we know it as the, more frequently, as the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of what covenant? The Ark of the Mosaic Covenant. It would be the thing in which the tablets of the law would be placed. So there were to be three things in the Ark of the Covenant. The tablets upon which the part of the law was written, Aaron's rod that that budded, that was used in connection with the deliverance from Egypt, and then a jar of the manna that God sent from heaven to sustain Israel between their departure from Egypt and their entrance into the promised land. And the ark was to be fashioned in such a way that it could be carried on poles. The Ark of the Covenant itself, once it was made, was not to be touched. On the top of the ark was a cover, and on the cover, above the cover, were to be two statues of representations of cherubim who were be seen as guarding and watching over the things that were in the ark. And then the ark was placed inside of the veil. So inside the tabernacle, there was the holy place, which was inside the tabernacle, and then there was to be a curtain that was placed back a certain way, a certain distance inside the tabernacle, and it was to be a barrier, a curtain between the holy place and what would be called the holiest place, the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. And in there would be the Ark of the Covenant. And we will see what will happen there in a moment. And there are other things that were to be in the tabernacle. You shall bring in the table and arrange the things that are to be set in order on it. And you shall bring in the lampstand, that is the menorah, and light its lamps. You shall also set the altar of gold for the incense before the Ark of the Covenant, and set up the screen for the door of the tabernacle. Then you shall set the altar of the burnt offering in front of the door of the tabernacle. And then you shall set a laver, this is a basin, where there was ceremonial cleansing. So all of these things were actually representations of spiritual truth, representing different aspects of spiritual truth as it relates to God's people and their God. So, in verse 17, and it came to pass in the first month of the second year. So this was the anniversary of their departure from Egypt on the first day of the month. So they have been out of Egypt for 11 and a half months. Remember, the 14th day was when they left Egypt. So we're halfway through the first month. So at this point, the tabernacle is set up on the first day of the month. So it's been 11 and a half months since they left Egypt. Then verse 20, and he took the testimony, meaning the law, the tablets of the law, and put it into the ark, inserted the poles through the rings of the ark, and put the mercy seat, that is the cover, on top of the ark. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle, hung up the veil of the covering, so this separates the holy place from the most holy of place, the Holy of Holies, and partitioned off the ark of the testimony as the Lord had commanded Moses. Then something very important happens, something very important in the life of the nation of Israel, something very important for the individuals in the nation of Israel. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all of their journeys. Now, as the children of Israel were leaving Egypt, as they were fleeing toward the Red Sea, there appeared a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, which protected the nation of Israel and prevented the Egyptian army from approaching them as they made their way to the Red Sea before God parted the Red Sea and allowed the nation to cross on dry land, and that same Red Sea that God used to destroy the entire Egyptian army. So now, think about this. The God of the universe has now invaded the realm of the God of this world. The God of the universe has invaded the realm of the God of this world and has now taken up residence among his people. Can you imagine waking up every day and stepping outside your house, and there over the center of town, was this cloud rising up from the center of town? And when you went to bed at night, there over the center of town was a pillar of fire, something completely supernatural, something that had never been, something that had never happened in history. God had come down to dwell among his people. So this is a replica, a representation, a model of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant has either been lost or it has been hidden and has not yet been found. And this happened, it disappeared from the temple when it was built before the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. They did not get the Ark of the Covenant. So there are those who believe that it was taken and put into a hiding place. Some believe it is presently under the Temple Mount. Some have even claimed to have seen it. The Lord knows about that and whether it will ever appear again in the future. So the Ark of the Covenant was very special. Again, in it were the tablets of the law, Aaron's rod, and a jar of manna. And this is what we read in Leviticus chapter 16. This is concerning the Day of Atonement. And Aaron, who would have been the high priest, and Aaron shall bring the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his house. So the one who would represent men to God must first deal with his own sin. So it requires the sacrifice of a bull for himself and for his house, and shall kill the bull as the sin offering which is for himself. Then verse 14, he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the mercy seat on the east side, and before the mercy seat he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, and bring its blood inside the veil, and do with that blood as he did with the blood of the bull, and sprinkle it on the mercy seat and in front of or before the mercy seat. So this mercy seat has two functions. It covers the tablets of the law, which are broken. And symbolically, the blood of the sacrifices go on top of the mercy seat. And remember, God is dwelling over the mercy seat. And so as he looks down and sees the broken law, he sees it symbolically covered in the blood of the sacrifice. So the broken law has covered by the blood of the sacrifice. Incredible symbolism here. Another thing about the Ark of the Covenant, and this being the mercy seat, this becomes God's portable throne here on the earth. And when God would, when the pillar of cloud would rise up, it would move to another location, showing the people of Israel which direction that they were to go in the wilderness. They would take down the ark. They would get ready to move the Ark of the Covenant, put it on poles. The Ark of the Covenant is not to be touched. The priests would carry it on poles. They would tear down the tabernacle, pack it up, and then take it to the next location. And wherever the pillar of cloud stopped, that is where they were to put the tabernacle back up. And this was to continue through the time until they had a permanent location at the temple that would not be built for nearly 1,000 years, somewhere around 500 years later, the temple would be built. This brings us to the gold calf incident as Satan continues his relentless attacks against the redeemed people of God. In Exodus 32, we read this: "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, and the people gathered to Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.' And Aaron said to them, 'Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me.'" So what we are about to see is that idol worship is about to take place. They're about ready to make an idol. And the people have asked for gods to be made. So the people believed that when they made an idol, it became the dwelling place of the god. And in fact, that in their thinking, the idol itself was the god, and at least the dwelling place of the god. And notice this: they are giving their gold that they have in their ears of the wives, sons, and daughters. Where did this gold come from? Well, it would have been the gold that they received from the hands of the Egyptians. It was Egyptian gold. So, we read this concerning what happens next. "And Aaron received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf." A calf, the calf idol, represented one of the major gods of Egypt. So this tells us that as Israel was forbidden to worship their God, that they had picked up the worship of Egyptian gods as part of their daily life. And this is one of the reasons, I would say, that God judged Egypt. But more than that, then they said, "This is your God. This idol is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is the feast of Yahweh." So now they were calling this idol by the personal name of the God of Israel. They were calling the idol Yahweh. And so this is immediately starting to break both the first and the second commandments, and this will be a problem that will actually show up much later, centuries later, in the life of Israel. So with the giving of the Mosaic law and giving additional revelation, this brings us to the through the transition cycle, and so dispensational transition number 4 is complete, which places us here in the dispensational timeline, coming into the dispensation of the law. So Israel was to go directly from Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, and then to move northeast and then north up directly into the Promised Land. However, just as they were at the southern edge of the Promised Land, in the wilderness, between Egypt and the Promised Land, between the Egypt and Canaan, we find that they are camped there and they are about ready to enter the Promised Land. And the Lord spoke to Moses, Numbers chapter 13, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." So there were men from every tribe who were sent in. Verse 26, now they departed, so they went into Canaan, explored the land, went actually quite far north in their journeys, as they were trying to establish what they would be facing in Canaan, because the nation left with only 70 people over 400 years earlier, so they didn't know what they were facing. And they came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they said, "It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." So the descriptions of the produce of the land that they brought back was amazing. Even a single bunch of grapes was so large that it required 2 men to carry. Absolutely incredible place to live. And I would suggest that things have changed since the way they were 1500 BC, 3,500 years ago. I would say a number of things have happened that are different. I have been to Israel 4 times, and much of Israel is a desert. They have to irrigate for crops. Apparently, the situation through much of Israel was far different back at the time that they came out of Egypt. But in addition to the large produce, the large amount of produce, how fruitful the land was, a land flowing with milk and honey, they also gave another part of the report. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. And so there were Amalekites, Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Canaanites, and the people were afraid to go in because of this report from the spies. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are able to overcome it." And having been an eyewitness of what had just happened a few weeks earlier, at the most a few weeks earlier, when God destroyed the entire Egyptian army, Caleb had full confidence as did Joshua, that God could deal with the situation in Canaan. And this is where we will pick up for the next hour.